All right, let's dive deep into the world of H.P. Lovecraft. You've probably heard the name. You probably know him for, like, Cthulhu and cosmic horror. But today we're going way beyond just those tentacles and monsters to explore, like the actual guy behind all of it, the man himself. We've got biography excerpts, we've got some of his letters, and we've got some of his writing. And let me tell you, this is where it gets really interesting.
It's really crucial to understand that Lovecraft's life and work are like super intertwined. His own personal struggles and experiences directly influence the themes and ideas that you find all over his work.
Yeah. You're not kidding about struggles. I mean, this guy had a rough time, starting, early on, a lot of family drama.
Yeah.
So, like, his father, Winfield Scott Lovecraft, he ends up in Butler Hospital, a psychiatric institution.
Right, yeah. And it was actually for syphilis, which was a fact that Lovecraft himself may have tried to hide throughout his life. And this event, probably had a pretty big impact on his view of mental and physical illness, kind of instilling this fear of inherited darkness, which you see pop up in his fiction.
And then there's, his mother, Sarah Susan Lovecraft. So when Lovecraft was only 29, she passes away. Mm. And while it was obviously devastating, the biographical material suggests that his health actually improved after her death. It's almost like he was, liberated in a way.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, for sure. He was obviously affected by his mother's death, but he also gained a new level of independence, right? And his letters from this time actually reveal a mix of grief, but also, surprisingly, relief.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. We're just getting started. But even from these early tragedies, we see this theme emerging, this idea of knowledge being this dangerous, even like a destructive force.
Definitely. This fear of the unknown, this idea that some knowledge is better left buried, It becomes this recurring motif in his writing. It's almost as if Lovecraft, through his characters, is kind of grappling with these potential consequences of uncovering what should just remain hidden.
Yeah, and this sense of unease, it's amplified by his constant financial struggles. The sources indicate that he was never really financially successful as a writer.
Yeah, that's right. His financial instability was this constant source of stress for him, and it fueled this, sense of just unfairness in the world, which is a theme that you see, throughout his fiction. Many of his characters, they're these outsiders, often impoverished intellectuals struggling against forces they can't control.
So we've got this backdrop, right, of personal tragedy and financial hardship. Mm. Then comes his move to New York City, the city that never sleeps. Ironically, it seems to have given Lovecraft some serious insomnia.
Yeah. He moved there in 1924 after marrying Sonia Green, who was a successful businesswoman. And at first, he was really captivated by the city, its energy, its diversity. But that initial fascination pretty quickly gave way to disillusionment. In his story, Lovecraft, writes, and this is a quote, "My coming to New York had been a mistake. For whereas I had looked for poignant wonder and inspiration, I had found instead only a sense of horror and oppression, which threatened to master, paralyze, and annihilate me."
Wow. It's pretty fascinating how this experience kind of mirrors his own fiction, right? Like a lot of his characters, Lovecraft found himself, deeply affected by his surroundings. But this time, the horror was real.
Exactly. And just as his characters, his protagonists often find themselves confronting these cosmic horrors in these isolated and decaying environments, Lovecraft's own life in New York seemed to take a similar turn. His marriage failed and he became increasingly isolated, further fueling those themes of, societal decay that are all over his work.
So we're kind of seeing how all these personal struggles, like the early tragedies, the financial instability, the failed marriage in this chaotic city, how all of those things feed into this, this larger worldview, this sense that things are kind of falling apart.
Yeah. If we connect that to the bigger picture, we see that Lovecraft's personal struggles kind of become this lens through which he views the world, right? The decline he saw in Western civilization, the fear of the unknown, all of that was amplified by his own personal experiences. It wasn't just about, scary monsters for Lovecraft. He was grappling with some pretty huge universal questions. Mm. And this is where we get to one of his most enduring and influential ideas. Cosmicism.
Cosmicism. Right. This is where things get really mind-bending. I remember the first time I came across this concept. It kind of blew my mind.
It is a very powerful concept. Essentially, cosmicism suggests that we humans are just these tiny, insignificant specks in this vast, indifferent universe.
Right.
A universe that just does not care about our hopes and dreams or even our existence.
Yeah. Talk about a reality check. And this idea, it wasn't just some philosophical whim for Lovecraft. It's like deeply connected to his lifelong passion for astronomy.
Absolutely. From a young age, Lovecraft was fascinated by the stars, the vastness of space. He understood the sheer scale of the universe and the fleetingness of human life in comparison. And this understanding, this awe and terror that's inspired by the cosmos, it's really at the core of cosmicism.
And speaking of awe and terror, this brings us back to that idea we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Knowledge being dangerous.
Mm.
This theme, it pops up all the time in his stories, Ignorance is bliss. Seeking forbidden knowledge leads to ruin.
It's a recurring motif that ties back to his personal life in this, kind of fascinating way. His father's illness, shrouded in secrecy and shame, could be interpreted as a manifestation of this very fear. Perhaps Lovecraft saw knowledge as this burden, a pathway to madness and despair, much like, the characters in his stories who stumble upon these terrible truths they were never meant to know.
Right. It's like he's warning us, saying, hey, be careful what you wish for, because some doors are better left unopened. And then there's his obsession with the decline of civilization, this recurring sense of impending doom that just hangs over so much of his work.
Yeah, this is where another influence comes in. Oswald Spengler, a German philosopher, argued that Western civilization was in decline, and Lovecraft, already grappling with personal loss and societal upheaval, he was deeply affected by Spengler's ideas. He saw evidence of this decline everywhere, from the crumbling architecture of his beloved New England to the, social and political turmoil of his time.
It's like he took Spengler's theories and gave them this terrifying, cosmic twist. And this brings us to, a kind of fascinating aspect of Lovecraft. He wasn't exactly what you'd call a traditional horror writer. He was a very staunch atheist, which, when you think about it, seems kind of odd for someone writing about ancient gods and cosmic horrors.
That's what makes Lovecraft so compelling. He was this man of contradictions, a complex figure who really defied easy categorization. His atheism wasn't about denying the existence of all higher powers. It was about replacing the traditional, benevolent God with something far more unsettling, indifferent, often hostile cosmic entities.
So instead of fearing a vengeful God, Lovecraft feared this vast, uncaring void.
Precisely. And that fear, that sense of cosmic insignificance is really what fuels his horror.
Which brings us to a topic that we can't shy away from. Lovecraft's views on race. It's a challenging aspect of his legacy and one that requires honesty and nuance to fully understand.
You're absolutely right. Lovecraft was, unfortunately, a product of his time. His early writings, especially his letters, contain undeniably racist views, reflecting the deeply ingrained prejudices that were, prevalent in early 20th century America.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile that, with the brilliant mind who created these incredible worlds and explored these profound philosophical concepts. It's a reminder that understanding someone's work requires understanding the complexities of their life and times, both the good and the bad.
And it raises important questions. How do we reconcile Lovecraft's genius with his, deeply flawed personal beliefs? Can we separate the art from the artist? These are questions that continue to be debated by scholars and fans, alike.
Yeah, and they're questions that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into Lovecraft's work and legacy.
Yeah, it's a complicated conversation, but, a necessary one. We can't erase or ignore these problematic aspects of Lovecraft's work, but we can learn from them and try to engage with his writing in this, critical and informed way.
It's like you said before, knowledge can be dangerous, but ignoring uncomfortable truths can be even more so. So we've talked about Lovecraft's life, his, major themes and his flaws, but what about his actual writing? What makes Lovecraftian horror so unique and so enduring?
Ah, yes. The nuts and bolts of Lovecraftian horror. One of the most striking things about Lovecraft's writing is how he uses language to evoke this profound sense of dread and cosmic awe. He often uses very descriptive language, almost poetic, but at the same time he leaves a lot to the reader's imagination.
It's like he's giving us the bare bones of a nightmare and then letting our minds fill in all the horrifying detail.
Exactly. He paints a picture with words, but he deliberately leaves some parts blank, allowing our own fears and anxieties to take over and create something even more terrifying than anything he could have, explicitly described.
And speaking of terrifying, we can't forget about the creatures, right? Cthulhu. The great old ones, those tentacled abominations that are lurking in the depths of space and time. They're some of the most iconic monsters in all of horror fiction.
But, remember, As terrifying as these creatures are, they're ultimately a manifestation of Lovecraft's cosmicism, right? They represent the vast, indifferent universe that dwarfs humanity, the ultimate horror of our insignificance in the face of these cosmic forces beyond our comprehension.
It's not just about, like, being scared by a monster in the closet. It's about confronting this, like, ultimate horror. The idea that we are utterly insignificant in this, like, in the grand scheme of things.
And that's what makes Lovecraft's work so enduring, even unsettling. He forces us to confront these existential questions. Questions about our place in the universe, the nature of reality, and the limits of human knowledge, whether we like the answers or not.
So it's more than just spooky story. It's like a deep dive into the abyss of our own existence.
And alongside those cosmic themes, Lovecraft was also a master of atmosphere and setting. He created this really palpable sense of unease, often by describing these decaying, isolated environments that kind of mirror the decline he saw in civilization.
Yeah, you think about those, like, creepy New England towns he created.
Yeah.
Arkham, Innsmouth,
Yeah.
Dunwich. They're practically characters themselves, steeped in this, like, chilling, otherworldly atmosphere.
Exactly. And they're all part of what's now called Lovecraft Country, this fictionalized version of New England that serves as as the backdrop for so much of his work. It's a region that's, steeped in history and folklore, but Lovecraft, he twists it, he distorts it to create this landscape of cosmic horror, a place where the veil between reality and nightmare is thin and easily pierced.
Speaking of Lovecraft Country, what role did location and geography play in his writing? The biographical material mentions his deep attachment to New England, specifically the city of Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah. Lovecraft's connection to Providence was profound. He spent most of his life there, and the city, with its, aging architecture, shadowy streets, and its, rich history, it became this wellspring of inspiration for his fiction. A lot of his stories are actually set in, fictionalized versions of real Providence locations, imbuing them with this eerie familiarity.
It's almost as if he saw the darkness lurking beneath the surface of everyday life, the hidden horrors just, waiting to be unleashed. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Lovecraft's work, the Lovecraft Circle. The sources mention that he wasn't like this, solitary writer working in isolation. He was part of a community, a network of fellow writers who shared his passion for the weird and the macabre.
Yes, the Lovecraft Circle. This refers to a group of writers who corresponded with and were, heavily influenced by Lovecraft. They shared stories, they, borrowed each other's creations, and they helped popularize his work after his death. They were really instrumental in shaping the landscape of weird fiction and ensuring that Lovecraft's legacy would live on.
It's like a literary support group.
Yeah.
But with a lot more cosmic dread.
Exactly. And one of the most prominent members of the Lovecraft Circle was August Derleth. And he's a kind of controversial figure because he took Lovecraft's ideas and expanded them in ways that some people argue Lovecraft himself wouldn't have agreed with.
So Derleth kind of rewrote the rules of the game.
In a way, yes. Lovecraft's mythology was very loose, more about atmosphere and cosmic indifference. But Derleth tried to systematize it. He created this more structured cosmology with distinct good and evil factions among the cosmic entities. And some purists argue that this strays from Lovecraft's original vision.
But regardless of those differences, Derleth played a huge role in preserving Lovecraft's work, right? He co-founded Arkham House, a publishing company dedicated to, keeping Lovecraft's stories in print, ensuring that they reached a wider audience.
Absolutely. Without Derleth, Lovecraft might have remained obscure for much longer. It was through the efforts of Derleth and the other members of the Lovecraft Circle that Lovecraft's work eventually gained, the recognition and acclaim it deserved.
And that influence extends far beyond, just literature, right? I mean, Lovecraft's tentacles seem to have wrapped themselves around pretty much every corner of, pop culture.
You're absolutely right. Lovecraft's ideas, they've seeped into movies, music, video games, even fashion and art. You think about movies like The Thing by John Carpenter. It perfectly captures that sense of paranoia and cosmic horror that Lovecraft was so good at creating.
Wow.
Or, The dark fantasy of Guillermo del Toro's films with their, grotesque creatures and unsettling blend of beauty and horror.
And then there's the music. Heavy metal bands like Metallica. I mean, they have songs that are directly inspired by Lovecraft, tapping into that same sense of cosmic dread and existential despair.
And let's not forget about the video games. From Bloodborne to Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft's influence is everywhere. And it's not just about borrowing his creatures or settings, it's about capturing that same, that same atmosphere of cosmic horror, the sense that humanity is but a fleeting flicker of consciousness in this vast, uncaring universe.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing how this, like, one guy who died relatively unknown has had such a massive cultural impact.
And it keeps growing. There are Lovecraftian board games, conventions dedicated to his work, and the wider world of weird fiction, even fashion lines inspired by his creatures and themes. It's a testament to the enduring power of his imagination and the way his work continues to resonate with audiences across generations.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that that Lovecraft has achieved a kind of immortality, even if it's slightly terrifying and unsettling kind of immortality. But beyond pop culture, Lovecraft's influence extends to to academia as well.
That's right. There's now this whole field of study called Lovecraft studies, with scholars analyzing his work, his life, and his impact on literature, philosophy, and culture. They're exploring the complexities of his writing, the ways in which his work reflects the anxieties of his time, and his enduring relevance in a world grappling with climate change, technological advancements, and the ever-present fear of the unknown.
Which is pretty remarkable for a writer who primarily published in pulp magazines and was largely ignored during his lifetime.
Yeah. It speaks to the enduring power of his ideas and the way his work continues to tap into our deepest fears and anxieties. Lovecraft may have died in obscurity, but his work has achieved a kind of immortality. It continues to haunt us, challenge us, and force us to confront these unsettling truths about our place in the cosmos.
And that brings us to the heart of why we're doing this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about celebrating Lovecraft's genius or dissecting his flaws. It's about understanding why his work continues to resonate with us, what it tells us about ourselves and the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about Lovecraft's life. We've talked about his themes, his flaws, and his impact on literature and pop culture. But where does that leave us? What's the takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that Lovecraft was grappling with questions that are, still relevant to us today. Questions about, humanity's place in the universe, the limits of knowledge, and the fragility of our existence. These are all questions that, continue to haunt us even as our understanding of the world evolves.
It's like he was ahead of his time in a way.
Mm-hmm.
He was writing about cosmic indifference and existential dread way before climate change and AI became the huge existential threats that they are today.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes his work so compelling, so unsettling. It forces us to confront the possibility that, our greatest fears might not come from the shadows or from some, external force, but from ourselves, from our own, hubris and our relentless pursuit of knowledge without really fully understanding the consequences.
So it's not just about monsters and tentacles. It's about the human condition, about our capacity for both, greatness and self-destruction.
Precisely. And that's why, despite his flaws and the problematic aspects of his worldview, Lovecraft's work continues to resonate with readers and thinkers today. He tapped into something primal, something universal about the human experience, the fear of the unknown, the fragility of our world, the allure of forbidden knowledge. I mean, these are themes that transcend time and culture.
Makes you wonder, if Lovecraft were alive today, how would he view the world? Would he be even more pessimistic? Given the state of things, would climate change be the ultimate cosmic horror? Would AI be our downfall?
That is a fascinating question. It's almost like he predicted a future where humanity's own, hubris and thirst for knowledge would lead to its own undoing. And perhaps in a way, he offers this cautionary tale, a reminder that there are some things that are, that are best left unknown, some doors that are better left unopened.
Yeah. It's a lot to ponder, that's for sure. But I think that's what a good deep dive should do, right? Leave us with, more questions than answers. Provoke us to think critically and engage with complex ideas.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of Lovecraft. You know, he doesn't offer like easy answers or simplistic solutions. He presents us with this dark, challenging worldview that forces us to confront our own beliefs, our own fears, and our own place in this, vast, indifferent universe.
So to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on H.P. Lovecraft and his chilling, thought-provoking work. It's more than just tentacles and monsters. It's a reflection of our deepest anxieties about the universe and our place within it.
And as you continue to explore his work in the wider world of weird fiction, remember that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones that we create ourselves, the monsters of ignorance, of fear, of hatred.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. And remember, sometimes the most unsettling discoveries are the ones that we make about ourselves.